Trying to determine the best way to improve feedlot ruminant nutrition is a complicated task. University of Nebraska Lincoln professor and Nebraska Extension beef feedlot specialist Galen Erickson was the keynote speaker during the recent Nebraska Ethanol Board meeting that was held at the Hyatt Place Hotel in downtown Lincoln to discuss Distillers Grains and the changing feed rations used for cattle. Galen and his research team conducted a finishing study to evaluate the feeding value of corn distillers solubles compared to corn on performance and carcass characteristics in finishing diets. We met with Galen after his presentation to learn more about this research.
What we were talking about is how things were, and that means we had a lot of distillers grains. Things were going well. It was relatively inexpensive for the beef industry, and things just looked great. And then since then, things have changed some. It's less inexpensive or more expensive. The composition has changed. They started to remove some oils, and so there's a perception, at least in the beef industry, that it's not like the good old days, so to speak. But the data are pretty clear that it's still an excellent feed for cattle. We've been trying through research data to determine the energy values and let people know this is going to be the impact if you decide to feed whatever proportion of distillers grains.
Let's talk a little bit about some of those misconceptions, because there were several of them.
Yeah, well, for one, getting an accurate energy value in your distillers grains is quite complex, and the reason is because if you just send a sample into a lab, a commercial lab, which is very good for knowing protein, fiber, mineral contents, etc., they have equations that they use to estimate energy, and they know, and we've discussed this a lot, that those equations just don't fit for distillers grains and other byproducts. So you have to rely on research data, and so most nutritionists and consultants rely on what we've seen from performance trials and our research, as well as we're starting to figure out other ways to measure it, but it's, again, pretty complex, and you got to measure decibel energy. So probably the perception is that when we take out some oil, it's no longer any good. And some of that is because of those lab values that are just, the equations aren't set up for. But some of that's also just perception. How can you take oil out? It's going to fall apart in terms of energy content. But the data don't prove that. It's actually still a pretty good feed, but I have cautioned them as an ethanol cooperation or an ethanol board that whatever you do in the plant, we always got to know what's the impact going to be on the cattle, because we don't want any surprises. And I think the oil removal thing was a surprise for many cattle feeders.
Yeah, let's talk a little bit about the oil, because you've done some research into that, and you've shown that there is some differences, but not a lot.
Yeah, I think if the plants are just centrifuging off the oil, and instead of it being 12% fat, it's now 9%, you're not going to probably see any noticeable effect. As they get more aggressive, and I really get concerned if you add anything in the process to try and get more oil out, then we think it might be hurting the value more. So our data across the last 5 years, across 6 trials, suggests it's 8% poorer as a product with the oil removed. But it started out at 130%. So instead of being 130, it's 120 or so now.
Where do you see us headed in the next 5 to 10 years?
Well, I try to look at this from the state's perspective, and I think we had a lot of positive things going on. The beef industry was benefiting when we could purchase distillers readily and generally inexpensively. Cattle were doing well. Corn production was doing great, and so it was all good for our state. Now I worry a little bit because we have a little bit more antagonism, at least that's my perception, between the industries, and some of those benefits I don't see are being capitalized on. And some of that's perception, some of it may be real, and we have to get to the bottom of it if it is any real negatives of using distillers today. But we don't see that in our research system, but I'm open to exploring that in the future. So I worry we have to be joined when you have the only state in the U.S. that's got a large corn, large ethanol, and large beef industry. If we don't join forces, we're not going to be out competing other states with large corn, large ethanol, or a different state that's got a large beef industry. So I worry about it more on a state level. Let's figure out how to capitalize on our advantages.